Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm so happy to be with you all today. I get to see your faces a little later in the call, but for now I can imagine you all out there in Cyberland. Welcome to Liberty Hill's very first virtual champions event. Wish us luck. We'll do our very best. I want to start by thanking the folks who made this possible. First, our fundraising committee co-chairs, John Christensen and Paula Litt, our champions chair, Wendy Chang, Liz Levitt, in whose home this event was originally going to take place, as well as our wonderful board of directors and our staff who worked really hard to pull this off. So thank you all so much for all you do. I know that this time is such a struggle for all of us. It's surreal and tragic. And I just want you to know that you're all in my heart, and the Liberty Hill community is so important to all of us, and I'm so happy that we have each other during this time. We sent a survey out and many of you responded and shared that you of course are feeling anxious and sad during this time, which makes sense, and certainly how I'm feeling and most people I know. But most of you actually said you're feeling grateful. That was the #1 response that we got. One of the lowest ranking was hopeful, which of course makes me sad. But I hope today's event is a bit of an antidote to hopelessness, at least for today. And if you really want to feel some hope and inspiration, you can check out our Upton Sinclair Awards dinner video, which we are still putting out there. We're premiering it next week. And you'll see stories from donor activists and community organizers that you won't get anywhere else. So keep an eye on your email and social media for our video premiere. So today we're going to do the interview with the Honorable Eric H. Holder, and we have time for a brief Q&A from a couple of folks on the call before Mr. Holder has to depart. And then we will pivot to a champions reunion where we can catch up about how our beloved community at Liberty Hill is doing, our grantees, our staff, our donors, and how we're all responding to COVID in this moment with our philanthropy and our activism. So our topic today is voting rights in the age of COVID. This is on the top of our minds these days with the high stakes national election coming up in November. And as you all know, the Honorable Eric Holder is our 2020 Upton Sinclair Award honoree for his work to advance civil rights, voting rights, criminal justice reform, marriage equality, and on and on. So in lieu of celebrating him at the Upton Sinclair dinner, he's agreed to do this interview with us, which is really exciting, and we get even more of his time, so it's a special bonus. And I did get to spend a little bit of time with Eric Holder, and I was delighted to discover that in addition to his extraordinary accomplishments, he's also wise, witty, and warm. And he insisted that I call him Eric, so I'm going to try to do that. I am so honored to honor Eric and to have him talk with us today. So I'll let Mitch do the formal introduction and lead the conversation with Eric. But before I hand it over to Mitch, I want to say a word about Mitch Kamen in case you don't know him. First, thank you, Mitch, so much for introducing us to Eric and for leading the conversation today. Mitch is a donor, a Giving Circle member, and a former board member of Liberty Hills. He's a partner at Covington and Burling, where he works with Eric. And Mitch also serves on the LAHSA Commission, the LA Homeless Services Authority Commission, which is doing a lot of important work right now. The Daily Journal named him one of California's top 100 lawyers, and he's a hero in my book for his pro bono work on behalf of undocumented immigrants in challenging the federal government's policies on sanctuary cities, and also his work on behalf of our transgendered siblings in his challenge of the federal government's military transgender ban. And Mitch's biggest accomplishment is winning the Liberty Hill Foundation Founders Award in 2017 with his amazing wife, Susan Janko. So take it away, Mitch.
Thanks, Shane. Really appreciate those kind words. Really happy to be here with everyone today as well. And Eric, thank you for coming. You know how much Liberty Hill means to Susan and me, and we're really appreciative that you're doing this. I'm not sure if I've shared this with you before, Eric, but in the summer of 2015, our paths crossed when we were both interviewing to become partners at Covington. You, of course, had just finished your service as the 82nd Attorney General of the United States. You were previously a partner at Covington, but I guess our bylaws required you to go through the interview process. And I had the good fortune of following immediately after all of your meetings with the partnership. So in each of the offices, I came in the room right after you, and I was reduced to, unfunny opening lines like, well, you all must be really happy to finally be meeting with a qualified candidate for the partnership. I was humbled. I was really humbled, and it was for good reason. As everyone knows, I think, who's tuned in, your service as Attorney General was unprecedented in its success and in the many ways that you broke ground. You were the first African American to hold that office and the third longest serving Attorney General in our nation's history. Throughout your tenure, you demonstrated all the values that have driven Liberty Hill since Liberty Hill was founded in 1976. And your achievements were unprecedented in, as Shane said, criminal justice reform, marriage equality, and apropos of today's talk, in voting rights. I'm really pleased that your commitment to public service has continued, obviously through your time in private practice, and you've brought so many of our colleagues at Covington and throughout the nation into your National Redistricting Foundation, which I hope you'll talk about today. And you've spearheaded really important lawsuits like the case against the Census Bureau for its decision to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census. But just to let people in a little bit on the personal side, and really to just explain why I feel so lucky to have you as a friend and as a partner, you are remarkable in the way that you demonstrate and embody your commitment to justice in everything you do. How you mentor our junior lawyers, particularly lawyers of color and women, how you spend time with all of our summer associates and invite them to have lunch with you just to share advice on their careers, how you lift people up in meetings and encourage others to speak and be creative and never act like the smartest guy in the room, even though you clearly are. And I think I most appreciate the way that you speak such truth in such an unfiltered and unabashed way about what's going on in the country right now. You're fearless, you call it like you see it, and you encourage all of us to do the same and to stay positive, which I hope will be another theme from today's talk. Sorry, my screen just changed and I appeared in giant form. So without any further ado, and I apologize for the length of that introduction, I didn't intend for it to be so long, but I really am continue to be humbled by you, Eric, and grateful. And so appreciate you being here today. Let's turn now to questions about voting rights, if that's okay.
Sure, that's good.
Shall I kick it off? Okay. So why don't we go right into the heart of it? I mean, we're in the midst of this pandemic, and we've seen some really troubling developments around voting rights, obviously Wisconsin, among others. What do you think we should be doing right now, and what are you doing through your various initiatives to deal with the crisis facing us leading up to the November election?
Well, let me start by saying first, thanks very much, Mitch, for those extremely kind words. I was concerned. You know me very well, and that introduction could have gone off the rails, but it did not, so I appreciate that. Shane, thank you so much, and all the folks at Liberty Hill. I want to thank you for this recognition. As I said in the remarks that I previously recorded, you all are honoring me, but I want to honor you for all the great work that you've done for, I guess, over 40 years, focusing on a whole variety of topics that have certainly animated my professional life. And I hope that we'll get a chance to work together. The reality is that this pandemic has revealed many of the injustices that we all know so well, but maybe the larger part of our society was unfamiliar with. So there's a lot of work to be done. I'm optimistic about where I think this nation ultimately is going to end up, but it'll only end up in a good place if organizations like you are supported and if people like us, work together. But I think that we can accomplish a great deal. And now, Mitch, now having said that, I'm not sure I remember the question.
Well, leading up to the November election, what do you see as the great dangers and what work can be done to deal with them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that if you'd asked me that question before the pandemic, I would have given you a different answer. I would have said, I'm concerned about voter suppression. I'm concerned about things that have been put in place after the Shelby County decision and things that a variety of states have done to make it more difficult to vote. And I would have focused on the fact that certain people, certainly people of color and minorities, people in lower socioeconomic groups, were going to have a hard time in voting. But now I have those concerns coupled with concerns that are related to the pandemic. And that is, I don't want people to be in a position where they have to choose between their personal safety, the personal health safety, and the health of their communities, and their civic obligation and their right to vote. And unless we come up with a system that makes voting at home, I like to call vote by mail, voting at home, unless we make that more widespread, I think that's exactly the position too many people are going to be in. That means I think we should have in-person voting for people who decide that's the way they want to do it. We need to enhance the safety mechanisms around that. But I'm really concerned about just making available, as we do in a whole variety of states already, the opportunity for people to cast a ballot in a safe way. So those are my twin concerns now. And it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out between now and November.
Yeah, can you talk about how the twin concerns are related and how the pandemic has kind of laid bare the inequities in the system that existed previously?
Yeah, I mean, when we started the National Democratic Redistricting Committee back in January of 2017, we said we were focusing on the problem of gerrymandering, and that's still our primary concern. We want to make sure that the people are represented in state legislatures and in Congress to the degree that people vote for certain people, and gerrymandering really skews the system. But as we got into this year, and especially as we got into the pandemic, we began to realize that we could change all these structural things, and we've been pretty successful in putting in place independent commissions, knocking down gerrymandered systems through lawsuits. But if we put in place these structural changes, these positive structural changes, but people don't have the ability to get to the polls and actually cast a ballot, well, all of our work would be close to for naught. And so that's why we've kind of expanded the concerns that we have. I call opening the aperture a bit. And so now we're not only focused on combating gerrymandering, we're also focusing to a degree that I don't think we expected, making sure that people have the right to vote. That's a lot of it is connected to the health concerns we have, to the pandemic, but a lot of it also is related to the structural things that have been put in place, or efforts that are underway to keep people away from the polls.
Are most of those efforts undertaken locally through local political initiatives, or are they being managed centrally?
Yeah, we have a small staff in Washington, D.C. What we are trying to do is make sure that we're touching base with organizations and individuals on the local level who we've identified as being effective. They're the ones who will know their communities best. They're going to be the people who have the ability to get out and move things in a way that somebody from Washington, D.C. cannot. I mean, as an example, one of the concerns as we look at Wisconsin, which is probably the most gerrymandered state in the country now, that is a place where African Americans in Milwaukee have had a number of issues they've had to deal with in trying to get to the polls, trying to combat the problem of gerrymandering. So instead of us going into Wisconsin trying to decide, what is it that we do, we have partnered with a relatively small organization called BLOC, Black Leaders of Communities. And we have funded BLOC with relatively small amounts of money, $25,000, I think, to start, $50,000, $75,000 in the last election cycle. But that has enabled this really community-based organization to reach out to people in the African American community in Milwaukee and really increase voter turnout throughout Milwaukee in a very substantial way. And so that's kind of an example of the way in which we have operated, finding, again, those good organizations at the local level and then supporting them either through digital means or sometimes through financial means.
That's like the Liberty Hill model. That's why Shane is smiling.
Yeah.
What about, how's the opposition organized? Is there a concerted national effort to create barriers to voting? Is that mostly local? How's that happening?
Yeah, it works on a couple of levels. I think in some ways the ultimate compliment. The Republicans decided that we were pretty effective, and so they formed their own organization after ours. I think it's called the National Republican Trust or something like that. It's headed by former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. So there is that national organization that they have in place. But what the other side has done with regard to the power that they got as a result of the gerrymandering that was done in 2011, Princeton University did a study and made the determination that the gerrymandering done in 2011 was the worst of the past half century. So just to give you a sense of the magnitude of it, but use the power that they had as a result of the gerrymandering that they did in the state legislatures to put in place mechanisms, measures, including photo ID, other things that keep people away from the polls. So it operates both at a national level. The opposition operates both at the national level and at the state and local level as well. But using that power that was derived from that inappropriate gerrymandering in 2011.
There obviously was a lot of attention paid to foreign election interference. Do you perceive that as a major threat? Is it on par with the domestic threat?
Yeah, it's different. You know, it is of great concern to me. I think we certainly have seen that in 2016, you know, the Russians came a-calling and they did some things. And it's a lot of it is subtle. The use of social media, I expect we're going to see that. We were seeing it already, but I expect we'll see it even more. So yeah, that is something that concerns me a great deal. And what really concerns me, though, is that we as a nation have not put in place the mechanisms that I think would be effective in combating this foreign interference. As if we saw it, what happened. It was documented. I think if you look at it objectively, it was pretty well documented in the Mueller report. And yet we have not put in place the things that I know career people at the Justice Department certainly have recommended. And it's not, I think, an appropriate response by our government. This is something that we should take seriously and try to make sure that the elections that we have in November are decided by the American people and not by anybody outside our borders.
Yeah. Do you think is there any chance we don't have an election in November? I think that's a question a lot of people are asking, whether there'll be a play to move it because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think, I've done some TV shows and people say, oh, Trump's going to move the election. Well, no, actually he can't do that. It's a federal statute that sets the election day as the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And unless the Democratic House of Representatives goes along with the Republican Senate and the Republican governor, we're going to have an election, I guess, on November 3rd. So Bill Maher, whenever I go on his show, he's always asking me about, well, Trump's never going to leave and going to move the election. I'm saying, well, I don't know about not leaving, but I can pretty much guarantee that we're going to have an election on November the 3rd.
Also, coming back to the means of that election, what can people do? In LA County, our Board of Supervisors voted to ensure that every voter gets a vote by mail ballot. Some states have announced this. I think Trump's response was, well, that basically ensures no Republican will ever win in California or something like that. But what is actually being done, and how can people get involved in ensuring that everyone has the chance to get to the ballot either virtually or in person?
Yeah. Well, one thing I think people need to understand, kind of let's level set here. There's no proof. There are no studies that show that voting at home, voting by mail, favors one party or the other. One thing it certainly does is it increases turnout every place that it has occurred. And so, the Trump concern about voting by mail being inherently unfavorable for Republicans, inconsistent with the data. Now, you have a great system in California. We frequently talk about the ways in which the commission there does redistricting. It's one of the examples that we say this is what we need to have: an independent commission to do redistricting in 2021. California, Arizona, kind of the places that we always hold out. And so I think that's a good thing. The fact that you've gotten these ballots so that you can participate by mail, I think is a good thing. We frequently get people from different states will say, well, my state's pretty good, but I'd like to be participating in ways in which I can help people in other states who might not have the same positive situation. We have a thing called All on the Line. That is our advocacy effort. It is a way in which people in California, for instance, can help people in North Carolina, Wisconsin, in their struggles to have a fair system. If you go to allontheline.org, lays out all the ways in which you can participate. One of the most heartwarming things that I saw in the last election cycle, I guess in 2019, I went to Denver and met with some All on the Line volunteers who were in that process of helping people in Virginia through phone calls that they were making, just so that people understood when the election was going to be, what they needed to have in order to cast a ballot, and then to point out the candidates who were standing for a fair electoral system. So if you're in California and you're satisfied with California but concerned about other things in the country, as I said, look up our All on the Line effort.
I guess I'll ask a broader question than just voting rights, but how do you think things are looking for the change in the presidency in November?
Well, now I'm a Democrat and proud to be one. I think that you can't take anything for granted, and 2016 certainly demonstrated that to us. I mean, I like to see all the people who predicted that Donald Trump was going to be elected in 2016. There weren't a substantial number of those folks. And so even though the polls at this point to a potential Biden victory, I still think we have to make sure that as Democrats, we have to make sure that we are working hard and getting out the vote. Especially, I think that's really the biggest thing. I think if Democrats, progressives come to the polls, that we'll do just fine. Which means we have to combat the pandemic, combat the things that have been put in place to keep us away from the polls. So keeping up enthusiasm and getting people to the polls, I think is really, really important. There are a lot more ways in which Joe Biden can get to the necessary 270 electoral votes as opposed to Donald Trump. I think Michigan, Pennsylvania, I think are going to be okay for the Democrats, which means that if 2016 map otherwise stays the same, Joe Biden needs to win one more state. Wisconsin, that's going to be not going to be an easy state. Arizona, Florida. I think Arizona, Florida, and Wisconsin are the three that I would look at. Those, if one of those falls for Biden, I think he'll get to 270.
So was I right in characterizing you as an optimist these days?
Yeah, I mean, I actually am. I think that in a lot of ways, what we have seen as a result of the pandemic, the disparities in healthcare, the disparities in outcomes in relation to the illness, has laid bare what, as I said before, a lot of us have already known, that if you're a person's poor, if you're a person of color, the healthcare system that you deal with is fundamentally different maybe than the healthcare system that I deal with, and that is something that this nation has to come to grips with. I mean, I think that this pandemic has posed a number of challenges, but it also gives us significant opportunities, and I hope that's what we take advantage of, both in terms of our electoral system, and maybe we go to a system where people have the ability to vote at home. I suspect if we make it available to people in large numbers this November, people are going to say, well, wait a minute, why do I need to go to the polls if I can just vote at home and mail my ballot in? I like that system. We have seen these problems with our healthcare system and how people of color have been disproportionately impacted by the virus. All right, well then let's examine why is that. What fixes can we make there? So there are a whole variety of things I think that there are challenges now, and it's tough. But we've faced tough things in the past, as a nation, and it is when things are toughest that I think the American people are at their best. And so I think with with good leadership and with a focused American population, we can make this country better than it has been.
Thank you. Well, I know Shane wanted to open it up for questions. We have a lot of people on the call with us, but thanks for all of that, Eric. Really, really helpful to hear from you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. That was great. Such good stuff, and really appreciate your optimism especially, I know how hard that can be, especially with everything that you've experienced. So let's see, I think we have a slide that's going to help people raise their hands. If you want to ask a question, we probably have time for 2 or 3 very short questions. I know Eric has to go soon. So use the little raise your hand function, and I'll call on a couple people and you'll be unmuted so we can hear your voice to ask your question. So hopefully that makes sense. And let's see, who do we have who wants to ask a question? See, looks like we have John Christensen. Sounds like John may not be unmuted. Is there a way to unmute him?
There, I think you have unmuted
There
me.
you are, John.
Yes. Hello. Thank you for joining us. My daughter works in the U.S. Senate for the ranking member on the committee that has the Postal Service in its purview, and so I have a kind of personal interest. Her life is consumed by concern about the Postal Service right now, and if we are staking part of our strategy on the ability to vote for people to vote by mail and vote at home, I wonder if you could tell us your thoughts about, about the crucial role of the Postal Service in that, and what needs to be done to, prevent the dismantling of the Postal Service.
Yeah, that's a really good point, John. And certainly tell your daughter I said thank you for all the great work that that she's doing. That is a really important part of our electoral system. In a way that I don't think people have necessarily focused. I spoke to the House Democrats, I think about 2 weeks or so ago, and talked about a number of things that I hope that they would include in the next bill they put forward, and they did in the HEROES Act. And one of the things I said was to focus on the Postal Service. The Postal Service just, again, before the pandemic, needed more support. The Postal Service is almost as old, virtually as old as the Republic. Something that Ben Franklin, talked about. It is a unifying force, in our country. And if we're going to have vote at home, vote by mail, you've got to have a robust, vibrant United States Postal Service. And so included in the HEROES Act that the House just passed and is sent to the Senate is a very substantial amount of money, I think about $25 billion, that would go to the Postal Service. And if you think about those women and men who basically kind of put their lives on the line so that we would get the packages that we get during the pandemic, who have unified this country, as I said, who've been there, throughout all the other emergencies that we've seen as a nation and during the history of this nation. That is a thing that I think we should support just generally, and then specifically with regard to the electoral process in November. I think the inclusion of that provision in the HEROES Act is something that is very important. Now, we have come up against a president who, for whatever reason, is not supportive of that. He's got this problem with Amazon and rates and all of this stuff. Forget about all that. I mean, this is something that I think is extremely, extremely important. If we want to have vote at home, if we want to have people have the ability to vote and not put their health at risk, we have to have a really great functioning Postal Service. So I've talked about it. I did a tweet about the Postal Service in support of it, I guess about 2-3 weeks or so ago. And I just kind of, came to me and just put something out there. And boy, I've had overwhelming response. I think I have about 2 million views right now with really overwhelming support of it. So I think it's something that the American people support. We just have to make sure that those people have the ability, people who are in the Senate and in the House in Washington have the ability to make the money available to the Postal Service.
Great. Thank you, John, for a good question. Let's go to Nancy Stevens.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us. I'm on the board of the Union of Concerned Scientists, and a lot of time was spent at our board meeting, virtual board meeting, talking about climate intersects with COVID. And this is supposed to be a particularly hurricane weather, heavy weather Atlantic. So what do we do if the 25th of October we have a Katrina or Harvey? And we're also, I mean, we're just seeing in Michigan right now with this rain and flooding where people are taking their life in their hands by staying in their home, which could be washed away, rather than going to the auditorium in the high school because of their fear of getting COVID. And I remember how the Panhandle and the hurricane there affected the election in 2016. So it's a big concern that nobody is thinking about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the point you raise is a very valid one. And I've seen those reports about this is supposed to be a very active hurricane season on the East Coast, which means that, you've got potentially at least some of the most populated parts of the country potentially at risk with regard to, a hurricane. And we're certainly seeing that now play out in Michigan with the rains that they've had, the failure, I guess, of 2 dams, and people, wanting to do the right thing, it's the safe thing, but concerned, as you say, about going to centers out of concern that they don't want to contract the virus. And so these mitigation measures that we have, as weird as it's going to sound, we have to try to make people understand that you're dealing with a natural disaster, a very significant natural disaster. You have to continue to do all these mitigation things. I remember looking at a chart. If everybody wore a mask, the chances of transmission go down unbelievably low. I mean, really, really plummets. And so if we continue to, stress that, and if, for instance, in the schools where people would, leave their homes and, as you see people gather in auditoriums, gyms, make sure that in those places we have the ability to have people socially distance. We have masks for them to put on. Maybe that'll put people at ease. I hope that we're not going to have to face natural disasters in addition to the pandemic come November or anytime, actually. But we will learn, I think, from what happens in Michigan. We've got a good governor there who we helped elect back in 2018, Gretchen Whitmer. And she's done, I think, a good job during the pandemic. They've now added to her responsibilities the response to the flooding. So I think it's something that I think we can manage, but it's going to be difficult. And it comes down again to those measures that we have to take to fight off the pandemic. Washing our hands, wearing masks, and socially distancing ourselves.
Great, thanks, Nancy. And our last question is going to come from Catherine King.
Hi, thank you for joining us. I'm curious in regards to gerrymandering. Wait a minute, sorry. I've screwed up my thing.
Yep.
Okay. If you can give a couple examples of states where you've been able to make some impact with managing and changing the gerrymandering and the ways. Sorry, I got all flustered here. If there's a couple of little quick stories of their wins or loses or struggles or how that's going.
Sure. Well, we had a number of successes. Let me just pick a couple. In North Carolina, we brought lawsuits that challenged the gerrymandered state legislature as well as the gerrymandered congressional representation that went from North Carolina to the United States Congress, the House of Representatives. And there we got a 3-judge panel to rule in our favor, and the new maps have been drawn. They will be the maps that will be used to conduct the election in November of this year. So lawsuits, we won lawsuits in Pennsylvania and in North Carolina, very similar. Again, had the courts redraw the districts. We've also been successful in getting independent commissions put in place. Take it out of the hands of politicians altogether. Don't let politicians pick their voters, let the voters choose who their representatives ought to be. So put in place these independent commissions like you have in California. And we now have them in Michigan, Missouri, Utah, and Colorado. We thought that we would put these initiatives before the people. Anytime people have the ability to vote on them, they support them. Now we are fighting something I did not anticipate, and that is Republican efforts to take power away from these commissions. And so in Missouri and in Michigan, we've been fighting those battles, but had successfully in federal court protected the commission in Michigan. And then we've also supported candidates who will stand for fair redistricting. We flipped 12 seats in the Texas State House of Representatives in 2018. We need to flip 9 more in 2020. And then the Democrats will be in control of the Texas House of Representatives, and that will give Democrats a seat at the table. The redistricting is done by the governor and then the 2 houses in the legislature. And if Democrats are in control of at least one, it means the Democrats have the ability to make sure that the process is a fair one. And what I've always said is that the NDRC, the Democratic Redistricting Committee that I had, it is not designed to gerrymander for Democrats. All we want to do is have a fair system, because I'm confident that if the system is fair, Democrats and progressives will do just fine. So through electoral efforts, through lawsuits, and through the creation of these independent commissions, we've had a pretty substantial effect on the process. And we're going to be in a much better place come 2021 as a nation than we were in 2011. This is something that people are now focusing on in a way that we did not in 2011.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Eric, we have one more person waiting in line to ask you a question. You're of course free to go. I think we've kept you past your expiration date here, but if you do have a couple more minutes.
As long as you want me.
Don't tempt us. All right, we'll let Ziza have the last question.
Hi, thanks. My question is regarding optimism. Are you optimistic that this national popular vote initiative will be successful? And even if it passes in the states, is it going to be subject to endless litigation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For those who don't know, the National Popular Vote Initiative is designed to really kind of take out of our electoral system the Electoral College without having to amend the Constitution. You'd in essence have the states cast their electoral votes for the popular vote winner nationally, as opposed to the person who won the popular vote in a particular state. And we're now up to about 195 electoral vote states that have said that have 195 electoral votes that yet will sign on to this compact. And once it gets to 270, these statutes are all self-executing, and then it would go into effect. So I think it's been tough to get to the 195 or so that I think we are now. We need to get an additional 75. I was talking actually before I mentioned Gretchen Whitmer. I was talking to her about this, before the pandemic. Michigan is one of the states that has not yet signed on and can. So I think it's going to be relatively tough to get that last 75 votes or so, states that have those 75 votes. But I think once it's passed, I'm not sure you can sue, but I don't think there's any real basis for a successful lawsuit. How electoral votes are cast is decided by state law. And that's actually one of the things that the Supreme Court's considering now in cases that were argued, just last week, this notion of, faithless electors, people who are selected to represent one candidate or vote for one candidate and then choose to go another way. It seems that the justices are saying that, state law can control there and you can punish a faithless elector. If that's the case, it means that state laws that would say our electoral votes go for the national popular vote winner as opposed to the state popular vote winner would be something that I think would be constitutional and would be upheld by the courts. So I think the question really is having the ability to make sure that you have enough legislatures who will put in place these measures and then have governors who will sign them. So that's another reason why we have to make sure that we don't have gerrymandered legislatures, Republican legislatures who will stand in the way of this. And Republicans, I think, are being short-sighted in their opposition to this, because the reality is they see this as something that favors Democrats, progressives. They tend to forget that if George Bush had lost Ohio to John Kerry, Kerry would have won the electoral college. He would have won the election, even though he got about 2.5 million votes less than George Bush. And so it's been a couple of times where it's been the Democratic candidate who's lost. It could be the Republican candidate. And at the end of the day, for the greatest democracy in the world, I think he needs to do away with the electoral college and just make the determination one that the people decide. Whoever gets the greatest number of votes should win. Every other election in this country is decided on that basis. Every industrialized nation in the Western world decides their elections in that way. Other than those who have parliamentary systems. So I think it's a good reform measure, and one that I'm hopeful can be put in place. And if it is put in place, I think it will survive any lawsuits that might challenge it.
Great, thank you so much, Aziza. Eric, do you have any final words you want to share with us before you depart?
Sure. Again, I want to thank you all for allowing me the time that I've had to spend with you. And on that question of optimism, I said I'm a pretty optimistic person generally, and I'm really optimistic specifically about this nation and where we are right now. There's still a range of things that we have to work on, and I salute you at Liberty Hill for the great work that you do and have done in dealing with those issues. But this nation's better now than it was 50 years or so ago, and better than it was 50 years before that. I am the first African American to serve as Attorney General of the United States. My father served in World War II, and while he was in uniform in North Carolina and in Oklahoma, was told to go to the back of a train or to come around the side so that he could get a hamburger, because they wouldn't serve black folks. And this is while he was in uniform, and this is while World War II is going on. And so his son became Attorney General of the United States. My wife's sister was the young African American woman who integrated the University of Alabama when George Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door. And so, that's 1963. You fast forward to, 2009, I'm sworn in as Attorney General, serving in the administration of the first African American president. So we made progress. Progress is not always, doesn't happen in a linear way. Sometimes we go forward and then we take a couple of steps back. But we're generally on the path of positive change. And that's what I think we can accomplish. But positive change doesn't happen on its own. It's not promised. It only happens when concerned people like you all make it happen. Dr. King says the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But it only bends towards justice when people like you put their hands on that arc and pull it towards justice. And that's what Liberty Hill has been doing, for the last 40 years. So am I optimistic? Yeah, because I think people have been awakened by this administration, by this pandemic. I think people are more committed to making positive changes and understanding that government has to be something that will help the majority of the people and not the special interests. I'm confident about young people and the way in which they view the world and the things that they think are important. So overall, I think we've got a lot of issues to overcome. But if we fight, if we work, if we're focused on this, if we commit ourselves to one another, we can make this nation better still. So I look forward to working with all of you. I commend you again for the great work that you've done, and I hope that I'll be a partner with you in the future.
Wow, thank you so much. It's incredible to hear your optimism and to hear you talk about Liberty Hill that way. And we're recording this, so we have proof. Thank you so much. So wonderful to spend time with you. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and your optimism. And Mitch, thank you for leading that wonderful conversation. And I think you can probably see most people, so why don't we give Eric some jazz hands to thank him and appreciate him and say see you later. Hi, Liz.
All right, take care. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, you too.